grooming really is about trying to be able to abuse with minimal risk of being found out. And so that kind of slow frog in boiling water thing. And I also want to say that the perpetrator sometimes grooms the community, grooms the parents.
Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle. Our guest today is Carol Odell. It's a little tongue twister almost. Carol Odell. She is a therapist, author, and storyteller, and her book is called Groomed. And so our topic today is going to be understanding grooming and abuse. And this is not a fun topic, but it is such an important topic. And it's also, you actually filled two of the pillars of my 4 pillars that I have for the podcast. And one is being an expert. And second of all, awareness and bringing awareness to areas of abuse that, we may not understand. And grooming is a big one. I mean, I think people think they understand it, but I'm sure you're going to share more stuff with us. So welcome, Carol, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate it. And hello to all your listeners as well. And I hope people take care of themselves, because this can be a tough topic, and sort of make sure they're managing their nervous systems and not get over-triggered. That's so important.
I'm so glad you said that. Yeah. So yeah, listeners, this could be a tough one. And so, yeah, definitely manage your emotions, pay attention to what's going on within you. If it's bothering you, turn it off, take a break. Nothing wrong with that. So you can always come back when you're in a different place. So thank you for saying that.
Yes.
So why don't you start out? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a therapist? Because I'm sure there's a story to it, so, as well as your book.
I have been a therapist for 41 years now, which is kind of shocking. And when I wanted to share more of what I do beyond my clients and my own caseload, instead of using a compilation of my clients' stories, I decided to use my own. I decided to be more personal and put my own vulnerability out there as a way to tell my story and hopefully normalize this for others and incorporate the healing elements, because it's important that we don't get stuck as victims, right? That we really can transform that and transform our lives.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Especially going from a victim mindset and breaking free of that. Yes.
Exactly. And my story is one of having experienced sexual abuse and violence that I was exposed to as a kid, growing up riding horses for an abusive man who owned the stables and the horses there. And kind of that grooming was so slow and was so desensitizing that I didn't even notice what was happening. And those around me didn't notice that either. And of course, it was we had different definitions of sexual abuse back then. So it wasn't even in the cultural talk and awareness.
How old were you at the time?
I started writing for him when I was 10.
Oh gosh, okay.
And then it lasted, yes, I wrote a letter to end contact with this man, Clarentine, when I was in my early 30s. So it was a long stretch of time that I had contact with him at various points along the way. And when I was a kid, it was every day. The horse barn was just down the hill from my house. And I could just run there with my own independence and be with these incredible creatures that I loved so much. And so that set me up as part of the vulnerability to abusers who hold that power and hold that leverage.
Yep.
Yeah. And then down the road, feeling like I'd done my work and that it was behind me and that I had processed it, only to find that its tentacles were still in me, and I was acting out some of that undigested trauma onto my relationships. And really, it's, set me up to really jeopardize my marriage at one point because of that. And so I had to go back and do more layers of healing.
Which is common. What you're describing is actually very common. I did the same exact thing.
Yes.
I thought I
Yes.
had done a decent amount of healing, and come to find out, yes, I had done some, but there was a lot more to go.
Exactly. And I think it's so tempting for all of us to want it behind us or to be
Yeah.
over it,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And so, but it's so multi-layered. And going back to that really helped me see where I could have more agency over my life, where I could create more freedom from the past and freedom from my reactivity about the past. And that's important. So it's not about the past being over or done with. It's how do we integrate that? How does it inform our lives in ways that doesn't limit us anymore? That's
Right,
important.
right, right, exactly. Kind of getting a different perspective, not dismi or diminishing what had happened to us, but just having a different perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's, people are wanting to forget their past,
Uh-huh.
but our
Yeah.
past is what we've lived through, and it's part of our history, and
And part
it's
of who we are.
and part of who we are, and part of our resilience. And so to honor that, and how to work with it in such a way that it doesn't, take over or get in the driver's seat.
Right, right. We learn to manage it rather than it managing us. That's what I always say. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Hey, thank you for listening so far. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you won't ever miss an episode. So the topic for today, so that's interesting. And so the topic today is about grooming. And you were saying that, earlier, and I think this is absolutely a great, unfortunately, description of grooming, is that it seeps in to the point that you don't even realize it. You're desensitized from it. It's just these
Yes,
little tiny things that happen, and before you know it.
that's right. There's this slow buildup for me, it started out with at 10, there were sexual jokes that I didn't get and laughter at my expense, that kind of thing. And then there was a notable time where for my first horse show, I was late for a class and he offered to braid my hair because I wasn't quite ready. So he was braiding my hair with his hands full of tobacco juice that he'd spit on them. And there was sort of this flirtation about it. But as a kid, and
I
this
have
is the
no idea.
difficulty, right? As kids, we have no context or contextual way to contextualize what's happening. And kids naturally want attention. They want to be seen, right? They want approval.
Right.
And that ends up being weaponized by abusers. So there was that, and then it continued on. And for me, mostly it was of the non-touch variety, although there were forced kisses and grabs, but the non-touch variety was more of the propositions, threats to take a horse away from me if I didn't sleep with him, this kind of thing. And some of the girls, unfortunately, around me had it much worse. But I think we have to be careful because, the sexual abuse now really isn't about the sexual act. It's not about sex at all. It's all about power and the power differentials and the way that we're hurt and betrayed by that. And so it's part of what took me a long time to line up with being sexually abused, because it wasn't even defined in the culture or in the DSM or anything. But now it's much more like even a suggestion of sexual activity when there's a power differential constitutes sexual abuse and can have the same impact.
Yeah, that's right. Because I don't even, when were the different types of sexual abuse added to the what is it called?
DSM.
Yeah, I was going to say DSM.
Various
Yeah.
versions of that. I'm not sure this exact timing, but when I first started as a therapist in 1984 that it wasn't in the
Oh.
in the DSM, and it wasn't even like they didn't even have a category for children being abused back then.
Oh my gosh.
Right? And so we think about that now, how shocking that is, and how far, hopefully, we've come in the educational process, which is an important part of
Yes.
preventative. But it was so, we were all so blind to it, and we weren't lining up. I mean, the education I got was, stranger danger,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Instead of really the bulk of abuse happens between, people that we know and
Right.
family members or whatever.
Right. And I was told that I'm not to argue with adults. I'm always to do what they say. And that, and so
Right,
that's a
right.
setup.
We get trained to be compliant,
Mm-hmm.
and so that just adds to our vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Well, I have some questions I think that are really profound that's going to really help our audience, and I'm sure you have the answers.
Oh dear.
So the first one is, how can individuals learn to recognize the subtle signs of grooming before abuse occurs, especially if it involves gradual desensitization. I can't say that word. Desensitization. There we go.
A
I
lot of
just got to slow down.
syllables.
Yeah.
Well, and this is, kids again, I don't think have the context for that of
Right.
really understanding it, but education can help, of course. And then for parents, anytime when there's an inherent difference in power, when you're talking about a teacher or a coach or anyone that's close to kids, because what perpetrators try to do is create access to kids
Mm-hmm.
and then try to manufacture situations where they can get kids alone. And so, trying to have unsupervised access. And so those are signs like that should never be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important thing to watch out for, because some of that, coaching or whatever, of course, can be very legitimate and very, innocent. And yet then if there's these other elements that start into play. One thing for my situation is the man who owned the stables that was abusive never wore a shirt. And just
Oh.
that kind of like self-exposure, sort
Yeah.
of sexualizing machismo out, those are subtle but not so subtle signs of
Ooh.
it should be at least a question mark.
Right, right. Not appropriate. Absolutely not appropriate.
Right. So those are some of the aspects, just in terms of the setting of how it can happen, because grooming really is about trying to be able to abuse with minimal risk of being found out, and so that kind of slow frog in boiling water thing. And I also want to say that the perpetrator sometimes grooms the community, grooms the parents.
Right. I was going to ask about that because I know it's not uncommon. I'm just thinking like kind of the coaching kind of setting,
Yes.
that the parents would automatically trust that coach and not even put anything on their radar, right? And so that's something that is important to know is, what do parents, because they earn the parents' trust too, right?
Exactly. And they're, often, like in my case, right, he's very charming. That's often a thing, is charming and projects a certain story that is bought by others and maybe, validated by the institution that they're working in. And, I think about all kinds of sports situations, the gymnasts that were abused by Nasser, and the parents were actually in the room. It became such a blind spot for everyone in the community because he was the doctor. He was the, professional and the gatekeeper to them being able to compete.
Yeah. A lot of power. A lot of power.
A lot of power.
And
for me,
power over the gymnast and the parents.
And the parents, exactly. But parents have to really work to stay attuned to that and stay connected with their kids and stay in conversation and be yeah checking in about what might feel uncomfortable or not. But again, the perpetrator can also use things like a specialness, like, wow, you're really
Yeah.
special, or we're going to be co-conspirators and doing this kind of breaking the rules kind of thing. I know your parents wouldn't agree, but you and I can. That kind of, pulling kids into an isolated relationship.
Yeah.
Despicable.
It,
Yeah.
it is. It is. It is. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had a question, then it escaped me. So I'll go on to the next one. Maybe it'll come back. So why is grooming often difficult for victims to recognize in the moment? This is great. And what psychological tactics do predators use to manipulate trust and boundaries?
Mm, mm. And some of these are things that we've talked about that
Yeah.
for me, I loved horses so much. They were just
Mhm.
like my everything, and they were my best friends, and I just adored being able to be around them. So he used that to his advantage, and the access meant that I had to dance around whatever was happening with him in order to not lose those relationships. So that's such a big setup, um, and hard for kids to reconcile because it's their dreams and their passion. Um,
That's the question I was thinking of is with the kids because, and I'm sure from your experience this is true that they don't know what's going on, right? But sometimes they know something's off,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
It's like
mhm.
all of a sudden you thought of this person this one way, and then he did something that was just a little bit weird or something that made you go, "Ooh, I don't. What does that mean?"
Yes.
So, what in this whole thing with the grooming in empowering the kids, and what is it we should be saying to the kids that when something feels off and giving them a excuse me, and giving them a safe place to express
Mhm,
that, and they may not even know that because how many of us had that weird little thing happen and we didn't say anything because we didn't know to say anything.
mhm. It's so challenging, isn't it, on so many levels? Like when there's two different competing feelings at the same time.
Yeah,
Like I adored this man.
yeah,
He was offering me so much in terms of access to the horses, learning to ride them, being able to show them. I had unlimited access to horses, and that was incredibly important to me. And yet then when these kind of feelings came up that were like,
something's
that
off.
doesn't feel good. It's really, I don't like that. That was, I had to negate that in a sense. So that's
Hmm.
where I split myself from my own feelings and experience. And, to my own detriment down the road too, where then, that split remained.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and I think the keeping the open communication channels with parents is so important. My mother was so anxious and couldn't
Hmm.
handle big feelings, and so that never felt like a point. Like it never even crossed my mind to be able to talk with her. And my father was around, but very minimally involved, and so that wasn't an access point for
Yeah, it
me.
wasn't a safe place for you to go and get support.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the other thing is there was a point where I was loyal to him because I didn't want to lose access to the horses.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I think I think for others in this situation that can be a place of shame later on down the road, like,
Sure.
oh, it was my bargain that I made. But I was so way over my head and
You were just a
thinking
kid.
that I had more agency and responsibility in that
Yeah.
situation than that was even conceivable. I wasn't in that. and that's part of it too, is we don't want to, I couldn't accept my helplessness back then. I wanted to see myself as powerful because the helplessness would have been too excruciating.
Interesting. That's a lot of awareness.
Well, I know I did all that unconsciously, but coming back to it, I realized
when you
that's
look
what
back
was
on it,
like.
okay.
No, I was oblivious. But I do think, unconsciously we protect ourselves with our various coping strategies.
Yeah, we do.
And, right, and that's one of them is like, oh, I'd rather be powerful, feeling like, oh, I've got this, or it's not so bad, or,
I can
I'm
handle
making
it.
a choice, I can handle it, much more than like, whoa, I'm way out of my, in the
Yeah.
deep water here and don't know, and don't have support.
And that's our brain wants to keep us safe, and we don't want to be getting scared like that. I just think that there's nothing wrong, and you're the therapist, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but having conversations very young with your children about their own intuition and about when they feel something's off, to learn to, even if they can't articulate exactly what that feeling is, but if something doesn't feel right in you,
Yes.
that you can always come tell mom or dad or a safe person, but because that is something that we don't even think to say. We say, oh, you don't go up and talk to a stranger, and now that we're the whole online thing, we're focused on that. But I think we really need to teach kids to listen to that intuition real young, because that has been a lifesaver for me so many times.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there is more education that way of like, if anybody touches you, you feel uncomfortable with any kind of touch. We're learning more about, teaching kids about how to set boundaries with their bodies and all of
Yes.
these great lessons. But it does also mean that the parents have to do work to be tuned into their own intuition
Correct.
and their own kind of spidey sense,
Yes.
and it's very hard, right? Like we come from generational trauma that isn't always fully processed, of course, and so that ends up creating some blind spots down the road too.
Exactly. Yeah. And we've got parents now that are both working and aren't able to be at everything for the children. And so that's hard too. So that's why it is important to really make that effort to connect with the children and to have open communication with them and check in with them, every day about what's going on.
That's right. Try to have some family dinners or try to have time where, computers are off and
Phones are away. Yeah.
And just trying to connect, which is so important that in terms of that kind of communication and preventative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions about this episode, or really anything that has to do with trauma. So you can comment below, or you can reach out to me at asklisatickle@gmail.com. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. Okay, so let's go on to our next question. This is really good. How can survivors begin to untangle the confusion and self-blame that often comes from being groomed? I should put this all on one page. Especially when the abuse was not immediately recognizable, which that is really common, that you may not recognize right away that you've been abused.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very much, that was certainly the case for me.
Yeah.
And again, we shore up our coping strategies such that we feel safe and protected, but don't realize until later on down the road that it's also constricting and limiting. So there's nothing wrong with the ways that we coped, and it served us really well. It was brilliant, actually.
Right.
And so there's no judgment about that. However, it does later on prevent us from, fuller expression of our feelings or being in touch with our feelings more, or prevents us from having deeper, more intimate relationships. So it is really important. And to that point, I think that we all need help with our blind spots. We can't see them ourselves because that's part of it. And so
Hmm.
whether it's a close partnership that helps be that reflection, or a good friend, or a support group, or a therapist, or some way where we have a wider view that can
Hmm.
be reflected to us, that's where it starts opening up, and bringing some more awareness to those places that we hold stories of trauma and have it kind of on lockdown.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, we tend to just kind of clam up and not share what's going on, and so we try to deal with it ourselves, and we do need different perspectives and different ideas and thoughts because we are limited in our brain, especially when we're really deep into our healing journey. We do need to get a different perspective, and absolutely. I've had aha moments by myself when I've just really gone deep within myself, but I've had some really great aha moments with therapists, with, close people in my tight circle that show me something that I did not see. And it's interesting when you're like, I can't believe I didn't see that. You're right. But it just it expands your world.
Yes, yes, exactly. And the first chapter of my book, I talk about how my husband kicked me out of the house because I wasn't seeing the ways that I was not sensitive to him, and I wasn't, I had disconnected from my sensitivity to my own feelings on a certain
Right.
level, and so then I was carrying it forward, and I couldn't tune into his as much as he deserved and was mutual for our relationship. So, and for me, the um, my coping included, right, like controlling, wanting to be
Oh, yeah.
superior, right, wanting to have it my way, make
Yep.
unilateral decisions, and
And all
because
that's done because you want to feel safe.
yeah, exactly. There's a motive behind that of like, okay, this
Yes.
is how I protect myself is by, controlling the outcome, and controlling those around me. And it's so well. There's a therapist that calls it normal marital sadism because it's sort of so it's kind of common, and
Yeah.
we don't we sort of normalize that and not really looked at, well, wait, where does that come from? What is getting in the way of a different kind of relating? And so it was actually a great gift that my husband said, enough, like, you've got to go back and do some work on this, like, this is not good for either one of us. And it really opened the door for me to do a much needed layer of connecting the dots around this stuff.
Yeah, sometimes we have to get ourselves really shaken up and it
Yeah.
gets our attention. There's been times in my life where something very dramatic like that happened and it was so hurtful at the time and I didn't understand at the time, but it really stuck with me. And then later I look back, I'm like, that makes complete sense. It was completely appropriate. But at the moment, boy, it
Yes.
hurts, but you did the right thing, right? You stepped back and you went and got help and got yourself better, and that's exactly what I did every time too. It took me a little bit longer, but it's
Oh,
it's painful when you get the hard truth.
exactly. It's awful. It's like my clients joke. It's like eating the death cookie. They call it because it just feels like that. Like and really it's our ego that's dying. By the way,
Yeah, yeah.
that we're trying to hold on to. But when we can come back around and have some objectivity about it, it really is the greatest gift when we get really hard feedback from a really compassionate place that we can't see at the moment, but really to recognize it offers us a chance to grow.
Hmm.
And that's an incredible commitment to a relationship.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Okay, got a couple more questions. How can institutions, families, and communities create stronger oversight and accountability to prevent predators from gaining access to victims? Whew.
Mm, mm, mm. And as we said, it's tough, but these days there are some great new resources. For instance, there's a resource called Safe Sport, And that's really for athletes that are in a power differential situation and have some questions, or want to make an anonymous report about a situation for somebody else. And the agency is committed to, looking into situations that get brought up and doing that tactfully but thoroughly. And that's so important. That hasn't been, that wasn't the case in terms of having that
Yeah.
in the past. And then I think what we talked about, like education, even starting with schools and
Yeah.
at home, and then I think about the Me Too movement, right? Like it starts opening up these stories that we get isolated with, or that we feel shame and shut down with, and realize, oh no, this is really, unfortunately, a common story, or there's these threads that many of us share, and
Mm-hmm.
that allows more, conversation about it, and more getting help with it, and more normalizing how do we address trauma in our lives. Um, you
You
know.
know, I was just going to say, my daughter-in-law is a teacher at a charter school.
Mm,
And so I ask her a lot of stuff like about, the trauma training that they've kind of got. They've gone through a lot. I mean, they're really good about their training and understanding. But do you think most schools even have that type of training for within the schools? And I'm sure it probably varies from school to school or district to district, probably.
I think that's true. I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that in a broad way from the educational point of view, but I certainly would be an advocate that it should be
Yeah.
part of what's just incorporated into, how safe boundary setting. What does that mean to have a boundary? What does that mean to teach kids to say no?
Mm-hmm.
Just some of those basic early on lessons can go a long way. What does mutual consent look like? So these are, those are
Yeah.
really important, really important.
Yeah. Education is, getting the word out. And that's one of the big reasons why I want to do this podcast is to get that information out there as much as I can.
And I was just going to add, podcasts are another great
Mm-hmm.
way and a newer form of having, stories be shared, and how important that is for audiences to know, oh, wow, I'm not alone.
Exactly.
And that is incredibly healing, because mostly the trauma happens in isolation. And so when we can hear from others, or turn to others, or be in relationship with others in community, that heals, that helps, serves to healing some of the past.
There's a really sad statistic that I had a guest share, and that is most women who are sexually abused, it's between the ages of 13 and 17 years old.
Yeah. Hmm.
They don't share that information for 4 decades. I know in my experience, it's true not just with the sexual abuse. And so these women, and in this, we're just going to go across the board. We'll just say these survivors are all suffering for that many years on average before they even open their mouth and begin to get help. And that's wrong. And I know that shame is the biggest thing that shuts that voice down. And we've got to open up our mouths, and we've got to start talking. And the abuse is not our fault. No matter what happened, it's not our fault.
That's right. No, it's really important, and that's a shocking statistic, and yet, right, we can see how that happens. I can see in myself how that
Yeah.
happened, again, these newer ways, podcasts, the Me Too movement, things, places where we are talking about it, then we can heal some of that shame as well. Another, awful statistic is that it's now estimated that 1 in 3 girls have been abused by the time that they're 18, and sexually abused, and 1 in 5 boys. And I think for the men, there's even more taboo about talking
Yes.
about it and opening up. And
Yes.
the survivor groups I know for men are so powerful, because
Yes.
here's a safe space that they really, because of the shame and all of that, don't feel like they have anywhere else.
Yeah, I always appreciate when the men come on and share their stories, and I've had several on here, and they're all amazing, and I've had some on there that have created these amazing men support groups that these poor men need. I mean, there's something a little bit deeper for men, and it's a little bit more sinister on with men, and there's so much confusion there for them, and I hate that.
Yes, I hope it's starting to shift. So,
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more men being brave and opening up and sharing.
yes, that goes a long way.
Okay, so there's two more questions. What are some effective ways survivors can process and heal from the betrayal and manipulation that often accompany grooming and abuse? Because I'm sure that there's a lot of survivors that go, how could I not see that? No, you can't.
One thing that I really advocate for is taking action, and by that I mean it can be any kind of movement. It can be rituals. It can be, of course, it's it's important if people can actually confront their abuser with the legal support of that. But that's not available to everyone, or is it something that everybody wants to put themselves through? So there's no judgment about that. But even just being able to write a letter that you wouldn't even send, but just the act of expressing and getting it out there, or doing some psychodrama, or having some way that there's an expression, because the trauma, we hold that in our bodies. And again, when we were abused, there's more freezing and constriction and lack of being able to move that energy. So anything now, even for people to be able to like express that through creativity or dance or singing, or is incredibly integrating for our systems, I think.
Writing a letter was a big one for me. I've done that numerous times, and that is so powerful.
It's incredibly powerful, and again, it doesn't have to be sent. It's just the like, what would you like to say that you couldn't say back then?
Right.
How do you give freedom to your voice and your anger and whatever else comes up around the betrayal? Incredibly powerful, and that's something that I offer for clients often, and then to have them read it out loud in a group, and just again being witnessed. And for me, I wrote a letter, in a contact, I told my parents, and then writing this memoir as part of that, also continual journey of putting my story out in the world, hopefully as an offering to others.
Right. Well, people will be able to connect with it.
Yeah, I hope so.
They don't feel alone anymore. It's excuse me. It's interesting how many times I've talked to people and our stories are so similar, and then there's just this connection. Like parallel. Like it's crazy how many of them out there are so parallel. And then it just you kind of have a sisterhood, but it's you're not alone, and all the thoughts and the behaviors that you do, you're not crazy. It's a direct response from your trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And we can see that sometimes, like when we're in a situation and our response is out of proportion to the situation. It's like, oh, okay, there's my trauma. How do I slow that down? How do I, give myself more choices and more space around that? Because that's really where we reclaim our agency as well. Our agency to move in the world differently than just from our reactivity.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's so true. It's when you get triggered and you give yourself that space. And I always describe it as like, my reaction is so over the top and does not match what's going on, and you feel out of control. Yeah, it's time to take a step back and breathe and get a different perspective.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, one last question. What do you want to leave our listeners with?
I really want to state that, again, it's not It's not about forgetting our trauma or what happened to us. It's about seeing that that informs our life, but it in no way defines us. I think we get that so confused, and it also doesn't limit us in terms of who we are or who we are becoming. And I think changing that lens from being a victim or a survivor to the new talk these days is post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
And I love that, right? Like how
Mm-hmm,
to like
mm-hmm.
realize that we can reclaim our joy, our happiness, all the experiences of our lives, and create that agency and freedom. It doesn't not uh, make us broken. It actually,
Exactly.
right? Our resilience to move forward differently is within our capacity. So,
I love that. I've never considered myself broken, and I don't like to hear others people say that they're broken because you're not
mm,
broken. No,
no,
no, no, no. We're just
no,
gonna, yeah, you just need to go in a
no.
different direction. You're not broken.
No, although I think it's so like it's there's what happens to us, but then it's what we do with what happens to us,
Right.
and often we create these stories, either that we around the shame, or that we had more responsibility than we really did, or that somehow we are a little less worthy or
Yeah.
valuable because of it. So I think it shows up in different ways with our negative self-talk.
True.
And so really rewriting those stories and challenging those old narratives is really important in the process.
That's a big one. Challenging those narratives, challenging them. Yes, which means look at them and where's the evidence? What does the evidence tell you? That one has
Yes.
saved me. I love that one.
Yes.
Because my mind sometimes will still go to those automatic old negative thoughts.
Yeah.
But that's
Yes.
exactly what I'm like, wait, stop. Where's the evidence? Let
Yes.
me see the evidence. And then the evidence tells me what the truth is. That's a great one.
Yes.
That's a great
Yes.
one. So,
That's a
Carol,
good
why
one.
don't you share with everyone how, if the listeners wanted to reach out to you, how they could contact you and where they could get your book. And of course, we'll have all of these in our show notes as well.
Thank you, Lisa. My website is www.carolodellmsw.com, and on there you can sign up for my newsletter. You can buy my book. It's actually, my book comes out April 22nd, so it's not quite available, but it can be pre-ordered on all the usual platforms at your local bookstore or through Amazon. Simon & Schuster is the distributor. Any of those places you can find it. It's called Groomed, a therapist's memoir of trauma.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing your story as well as the great tips on what others can do to pay attention to the grooming process that can happen with their children.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for having me on and for what you're offering in the world. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.